Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Health Professional Radio. You know, for the first time ever in the United States, a 40-year-old transgender woman who was on gender-affirming estrogen therapy for 18 years has just had sperm identified and frozen using a very specialized technique called ESSM. Well, here to talk about this technique is Dr. Michael Werner. He's a board-certified urologist, medical director, and founder of Mays Men's Sexual and Reproductive Health. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Michael Werner. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Well, give us a brief look into your professional background and then tell us what ESSM is and who it benefits.
So I am a urologist. I had endless training. So I undergrad at Harvard, medical school, UCSF, then 6 years of urology, then a fellowship in male infertility and male sexual dysfunction. And that's all I do is male infertility and male and female sexual dysfunction. And we have a very sophisticated lab called Maze, M-A-Z-E lab, actually named after my kids, Matthew, Adam, Zach, and Evan. And we, among other things, we do sperm banking. And we also do, as a urologist who specializes in male infertility, we're often given men who have very, very, very low levels of sperm or have no sperm when they ejaculate. Mm-hmm. And some of these men would actually have very low levels of sperm in the ejaculate, but we wouldn't be able to find that if we just, take a drop and look at it or even spin it down traditionally. So ESSM stands for Extended Sperm Search and Microfreeze, mm-hmm. which is exactly what it really says. Mm-hmm. So the specimen is taken and spun down, but every single drop of it is then looked at. And what makes it different is that if any sperm are found, they are micro-manipulated, just the way they do in an IVF lab to put a sperm into an egg. Mm-hmm. But we pluck up the sperm and we put it in a special container that then can be frozen and thawed, and 90% of them survive the freezing and thaw. So if a man has just very, very few sperm in the ejaculate, we can find them, and then those can be used either immediately or frozen and then thawed to be injected individually into a woman's eggs that have been retrieved through in vitro fertilization.
How does the gender-affirming estrogen, is it a huge challenge for this procedure, for ESSM? Well, really what it is the challenge for sperm production. Mm-hmm. So if you deprive a man of testosterone mm-hmm. and you give him estrogen, in this case it's a trans woman, but mm-hmm. still with testes, then that shuts down sperm production. Okay. And the longer they're on the hormones, the more unlikely it will be that there'll be any sperm. So before this procedure that we did, as far as we could tell from the literature, the longest that anyone had been treated with hormones, female hormones, and testosterone blocking hormones, and still had sperm was 2 years. And we found sperm after she had been on the hormones for 18 years, literally the day before she was going to have the testes removed, mm-hmm. In a gender-affirming surgery. Mm-hmm. So it means that any of the trans women can at least try to see if we can find sperm in case they do want to be biological parents using their sperm. In this case, the woman is in a relationship with a woman. So in that case, they can use her partner's eggs and her sperm, and they can have a biological child that's biologically related to both of them. So it's very cool. Are the challenges that are inherently present in IVF exacerbated with ESSM, or are any of the challenges alleviated? How you need to go about conceiving is dependent on the quality and number of the sperm, and then, of course, who's going to be carrying the child. If you have let's say what I really stress is that trans women bank their sperm before they begin treatment, because at that point they have the same quality of sperm as any cis man would have. Mm-hmm. And then in that case, if there's lots of numbers, then their partners may not even have to undergo in vitro fertilization, there may be enough sperm for them to be processed and injected into the uterus and do a lot of the swimming and fertilization themselves. So the more sperm you have, the less invasive you have to be. So the ideal time, and we actually bank a lot of women as they are starting their transition, but the ideal time is to do it then when they have really high levels of sperm or may have high levels of sperm. The ESSM is a great technique for finding very few sperm in people where we're not expecting to find almost any, or at least very few. In that case, the sperm have to be injected individually when there's so few into the eggs, and the eggs have to be retrieved from the woman's ovaries.
Does the literature or the research suggest that this type of procedure or a variation thereof can work with transgender men as well? I'm not sure if their gender-affirming hormone therapy causes the stop of eggs or not, but is that something that is suggested?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert at that. The thing is that taking eggs out from a woman is much more invasive than having a man ejaculate into a cup.
Okay.
So if you're a trans woman, you would have to undergo a lot of hormones, and then they would actually have to go in and harvest the eggs, which doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but it's a whole nother level of invasiveness. Whereas if we're taking sperm from a trans woman, they're basically just ejaculating into a cup, and we can do that at the very beginning.
Okay. Now, obviously, the gender-affirming estrogen therapy, for 18 years is one thing, but what about couples who are dealing with severe male infertility? Are there certain causes of that infertility that are more addressed than others?
So what I would say is that ESSM was most often used with cis men who are trying to get their partners pregnant, who have very, 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 very low levels of sperm in the ejaculate. It's called cryptospermia because it's hidden like in a crypt. And so you have and some of those men will have no sperm the day that their partner's eggs are to come back, or when you freeze them, you don't find any sperm. And if you've ever found a sperm on one of these men in any semen analysis, we have 100% chance of finding sperm when we do the ESSM. I'm sure that may change at some point, but it's a very, very high number. And so that's really when it's, I think, the most useful. Interestingly, 40% of the men who come in with zeros consistently, we are finding some sperm on. And the whole advantage is that this prevents the men from having to undergo an invasive procedure called the testicular sperm extraction, where you go in, open up the scrotum, and then actually looking through all of the tissue, because that is obviously more painful, more expensive, and damages the testes.
Give us a website where we can learn more about Maze Men's Health and the developments there.
Thank you. So it is Maze Men's Health, M-A-Z-E, menshealth.com, or mazelabs.com. And again, the procedure itself, which was developed in Israel, we just are the only ones to have brought it to America, is called Extended Sperm Search and Microfreeze, or ESSM.
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Michael Werner. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Health Professional Radio.